Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Esoteric and our continuing series, The History of the Dead, where I take a look at every single House of the Dead game ever made and talk about it in a historic fashion. And today we got a complete bonus episode for you guys because we're not playing House of the Dead, we're playing Sega Golden Gun. And this was developed by Sega of China, and it has a very big Chinese flair bend to it. But honestly, even though it isn't part of the mainline House of the Dead series, it's using a lot of the same assets and the same engine as House of the Dead 4, and there are a lot of design elements combined between both of them that make you really feel like you're playing a bizarro world House of the Dead. And it just felt like it was more important of a game than to feature on an imported playlist, so we're going to be talking about it here today on The History of the Dead. Before we get too far involved though, if you do a huge favor, go down below, hit like and subscribe, and that notification bell definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined and want to support the channel, we got a Patreon link down below as well. But get ready for a wild ride because Sega Golden Gun is absolutely insane from start to finish. And I will say that in a lot of ways this might be the best House of the Dead game that's come out in modern memory, even if it has nothing to do with the House of the Dead in and of itself. And I say that just because I love the way this game plays. It's action-packed like you want a House of the Dead game to play, all of the characters feel new and fresh, and shockingly the best voice acting of any House of the Dead game was not in a House of the Dead game, it was in Sega Golden Gun. But a lot of the animations are repurposed and it's using the same engine as House of the Dead 4, so you're going to see a lot of vibes that are very similar to this mainline franchise from Sega, even though we have this complete reskin of the game. And I don't know much about anything Chinese history, or who any of these monsters are. So if you recognize something that you know, do leave me a comment down below and tell me what it's supposed to be indicating, because I'm sure a lot of these enemies do have some sort of amalgam to Chinese history or Chinese monsters. It's just not a section I am familiar with. What I am very familiar with is a good light gun game, and Sega Golden Gun is providing in spades. And I love these lion statues outside of this museum. Apparently it takes place in Shanghai because this is modeled off a museum in Shanghai, but I love that those come alive and chase you. This game from start to finish is just straight up action. All of the animations of the enemies really lead those bullets, and the shooting mechanics are just straight up great. And that's what you would expect from Sega and the developers of some of the House of the Dead games, because even though this was made in China, of course they would have had input from some of the team that made House of the Dead games before that. And in a lot of ways, this game feels like it slightly inspired the House of the Dead Scarlet Dawn, and I will show you different sections in there where I feel like this game kind of led the development of that title. But as we go down here into the subway, you do get your choice of branching paths, and that was a first for Sega in a game like this with the zombie flair. But then if we move over to Scarlet Dawn, you're going to see you have the exact same branching path option here as you do in Golden Gun. So I do feel like maybe some of the design cues from Golden Gun were taken in to Scarlet Dawn. You'll see here as we get to the next level in the game, off to the left after we kill these zombies, there's going to be a merchant, and he's going to allow you to have upgrades for your weapons to do different things with them in the game. Now it's not as far as Scarlet Dawn pushes, but it is an upgradable system, and we wouldn't see something like that until we get to Scarlet Dawn, where we have all of these different weapons that we can use throughout the game. So again, it feels like even though this isn't linked to the House of the Dead in the story canon, a lot of the design aspects of it would go on to inform Scarlet Dawn and hopefully games in the future House of the Dead franchise, because I do love those different weapons in Scarlet Dawn. But what I really can't get enough of is the design of this game. I love that it's bright in the first level, or at least the one we chose, and I love how all the zombies are colorful and have that sort of East Asian flair. In some ways, it feels like other Sega games that have come before it as well, and I just really appreciate and enjoy that. Maze of the Kings from Sega had a very similar vibe going on, and I wonder if that game didn't help inspire Sega Golden Gun in some way. But these armored enemies with all of these plants coming out of them, this enemy with the cleaver that we just saw, everything is just so fun and reminds me of the House of the Dead. But the one thing that is totally different in a really good way is the soundtrack of this, while nothing like you've heard before from Sega, is an absolute blast. So go ahead and listen for like 45 seconds and I will be right back.
去楼上，从那里应该可以看得清楚些。
难得你也会说句有用的话嘛。这条路也许行得通。
别再穷追不舍了。我搜住你，都上你的当了。 让我鉴定下你们的实力。射击！开火！开火！
It's like traditional Chinese music mixed with jazz, but honestly I don't know anything about traditional Chinese music, so I'm just saying what my ear hears. But I absolutely love the soundtrack. It's fun, it's vibrant, and it goes really well with this level being in the daytime. And I kind of like the fact that we're playing a zombie shooting game from Sega, and sometimes it takes place in the daylight. It's just a different vibe than we're used to. But honestly, the bosses in this game are also spectacular. When I first played Sega Golden Gun, I wasn't expecting much because I had heard it was just kind of a ripoff of The House of the Dead, even though Sega made it and they can't really rip off themselves. And honestly, I fell in love with this game when I played it. It's fun, it's cheery, it's got zombies, you shoot them, it's a light gun game. It has absolutely everything I crave, and this gigantic turtle here that kind of has some kaiju vibes going on with him, it's just such a fun time. They're great boss battles that are reminiscent of things that happen in the House of the Dead, like having to shoot things out of the sky with different fights like with the magician, but it has its complete own theming, and I think it really works. And it is interesting because this was obviously made for domestic Chinese market. This is not something that really ever came over to North America. I just wish I knew more about what's going on. Everything's in Chinese. I've tried to translate it with a phone app. I don't get anything, but honestly, it's a Sega game where you shoot zombies. Bad guy's doing a thing. Go beat bad guy. That is the story. But moving on to the next level in the game, I love that we pivot from the daytime to this nighttime setting with all of that neon in the background and all these very vibrant poppy colors. This game does a great job with making all of the colors feel alive. The colorways they chose are just spectacular. I'm not sure if that's Dobby the elf, but it kind of looks like it. But slime monsters, some enemies are taken straight from the House of the Dead franchise. Slime monsters coming out of water, obviously in the first House of the Dead, but if we move over to House of the Dead 4, the game that this engine's built on, you can see the complete similarity. So sometimes you are just going to see copy and paste from Sega games past, but I love that there is that Chinese firework explosion there that you can knock enemies out with. It does just enough to feel completely different while also feeling 100% identical, and I mean that in the best way possible. And if you haven't played Sega Golden Gun yet because you think it's just a clone of the House of the Dead, it 100% is a clone of the House of the Dead, but it's made by some of the same people in the same company, so it can't really be a clone. Trust me, just play it. I will give you a money-back guarantee that you will have fun, but don't forget, since you can play this for free on your computer, that money-back guarantee equals absolutely nothing. But I do love this tunnel, not for the fun light show and everything going on, but for something that's going to happen in just a few seconds. I don't know what's going on. Maybe it's culturally Chinese, maybe they just thought it looked fun, but as the camera slowly pans down, we have to shoot wacky waving inflatable wiggling tubes arm men. I don't know why it's happening, but I know I love it. The other thing I love about this level is the music is even better than the last one, so listen for like 45 seconds and I'll come back and tell you more.
先上去再说。在那里！
真的在那里啊！不可思议！
喂，快看这边！
怎么回事？
美女要续光了！
Just those big brassy horns are so much fun, and of course it's a House of the Dead style game, so there's going to be little enemies that you have to fight on the ground. In this instance, they kind of look a little bit like, I don't know, grubs. But if you move over to House of the Dead 4, we have that classic House of the Dead kind of lamprey eel going for us. But again, you can always see the similarities between these two games, and that's what makes Sega Golden Gun so enjoyable, is that it's infinitely familiar, but you get this entirely new setting, and we have the next boss fight here. And sometimes this game, like I said, cultural understanding withstanding, meaning that I don't know much about Chinese culture, this is just a really interesting boss. She turns into basically like a white tiger, and she has basically like a smoke set of legs. It's odd, but it works. I will say on the difficulty factor, this game is much easier than pretty much every other House of the Dead game that came before it. I think I maybe continued 5 times in this entire playthrough, and that is maybe since I haven't played it for 6 to 8 months. If you are looking for a light gun game from Sega that you can 1cc, I would 100% start with Sega Golden Gun because I think it's going to be a decent time for you if you want to learn that. But moving on to the 3rd level, we go even deeper into that Chinese sort of flair with all of these pagodas and other enemies, and this is my favorite level. I just love the art style and the graphics. If you've never played the game before, Maison Flash the Blade from Namco on the Sega Naomi, a lot of the enemies remind me of enemies in this game. I think that's because that game also has a Chinese mythology behind it. I'm not going to show any footage of Maison, it doesn't fit the history of the dead, but just look that game up. I've got a video on it, I'll leave a link below as well. But again, just so much fun shooting. That's what this always comes down to. The game could be pretty, the game could have great soundtrack, the game could have all of that House of the Dead vibe to it, but if the shooting mechanics are not good, it would not matter whatsoever, and the shooting mechanics here are legit. It's as good as anything Sega ever did with the House of the Dead franchise itself. And in a lot of ways I hope that there's a Sega Golden Gun too, because I want to know what else is going on in this universe, even though I can't understand the language. I just have so much fun playing this game. I hope it becomes another franchise from Sega that we might see again, even if it is just in China, because of course all of these things magically, somehow or another, end up playable on your PC in pretty much every region, so I'm sure if there was a Sega Golden Gun 2 we would be playing it as well. But the one thing that always surprises me about this game, and even though I don't speak the Chinese language, is just how good the voice acting sounds. Now I don't know Chinese, but I do know the difference between good and bad intonation in voices and what does and doesn't sound like janky dialogue. So go ahead and get a little taste of the actual voiceover work because it is quite good, and I'll come back and I'll close out the video on Golden Gun. But enjoy it, it's good.
不错嘛，居然能逃过在下的死亡兔狙，值得表扬啊！
一直找我们麻烦的，原来就是这家伙。
看那里，
看好了，别眨眼，这才是我真正的实力。
射击！
Now I may have absolutely no idea what they're saying, but I know it sounds a lot better than the voice acting in Scarlet Dawn, and I can understand 100% of what they're saying. I just wish I knew what the story was. Maybe if there's a Chinese viewer of the channel, you could give me a little bit of an overview, better than what I get from the House of the Dead wiki. I would just be curious what they're saying in some of these cutscenes, so if you do know, leave me a comment down below and tell me. I would genuinely appreciate it. But again, just another epic boss battle, this Chinese dragon throwing these projectiles around. It's just another fun look. I love all the verticality to the fighting, and it does feel like a similar House of the Dead style boss, but in its own artistic style, and that's what's so great. Although I don't know how there's a subway station right here in this building. They put subway stations in the funniest places. But I also love that when you finally get to the last level of the game, you are going to the Sega building, and this gigantic phoenix, or what I believe is a phoenix, flies through, and what do we have? Another classic British sports car in a Sega light gun game, and that's been in basically every House of the Dead game since. If we move right over to House of the Dead 4, same engine, different game, we have basically the same model doing basically the same thing, and the approach to the Goldman building in House of the Dead 2 and 4 is almost identical to the approach to the Sega building in Sega Golden Gun. So it almost feels like the entire last level of this game is 100% inspired by the final level of House of the Dead 4, but it's a complete reskin graphically. And you will see here, maybe it's a phoenix, maybe it's a dragon, I don't know, we're going to call it a fragon, that sounds good, just put those two words together and it'll make it work. But it's just so animated. I love all of the cutscenes in this game, and you don't really need to know what the story is. You know that dragon's going to turn into something different, and you know it is not going to be a good time. And out from the ground comes this gigantic dude with this sword. Again, I am sure it's something traditionally Chinese. I just don't know. It looks more like a Roman soldier to me. So leave me a comment down below and tell me, because I googled around that a little bit and couldn't find an exact name. But as we come into this building here, this is an awesome boss fight. It is not a hard boss fight. I only take one hit the entire time, but the spectacle of it is dramatic and it is outstanding. And in some ways, even when you turn the difficulty up on this game, I wish it was a little bit harder. Now, I don't know if the Chinese gaming market doesn't like difficulty, so they balanced it for them, or if it's just maybe the game is being a little bit more relaxed than what we're used to. But elevators and building lobbies, the Goldman building has an elevator. Sega Golden Gun has an elevator. These endings of these two games basically mirror each other up until the final boss fight, and it is fun just to put them together and show you that footage so you better understand why, even though this isn't in the canon story-wise of House of the Dead, it does very much feel like it belongs in some way, shape, or form. You'll see here this is the only time I do take a hit in the final boss battle. But in between, you get to fight these other amazing looking enemies with these glowing eyes of green, and it just works. That's the number one takeaway of this game. Everything that Sega's doing is working really well. The graphics are outstanding, the music is great, the gameplay is good, and it has an epic final boss fight. But you can see here, all you need to do is shoot these 3 targets out, and that is basically how you defeat the final boss. It just isn't as exciting as I would hope. The game, even though it's showing you a lot of spectacle in the end, it just isn't giving you that final boss difficulty. So there was one negative I would say about Sega Golden Gun. It's the fact that it's just ever so slightly too easy. But the ending reminds me of something that would come in the future. Giant boss that comes out of the ground, beat him when the sun comes up. Well, that seems like the ending of Scarlet Dawn. We have another giant boss that's coming out of the ground, and he can also fly, and you'll see here as Ryan grabs that pole and shoves it into his head, the next scene once he is dead is going to be mirroring what Golden Gun is doing. The sun is going to come up because evil has been defeated. Now these might just be inadvertent coincidences, or it might be that the developers of Scarlet Dawn had played a bunch of Sega Golden Gun and remembered a few things from it, because here comes that sun. Just trust me, if you haven't heard of Sega Golden Gun before, if you've heard of it or you didn't think it was worth playing, 100% give it a shot, because I can guarantee you, if you like Sega light gun games, or if you just like arcade light gun games, you're going to have an absolute blast playing this game. I went in on my first playthrough with very little expectations, and I left knowing that I was going to have another game made by Sega that I'd probably play once a year for the rest of my life. Short of that, this has been a bonus episode of the History of the Dead. I'll have more History of the Dead for you next week and videos throughout the week. But Sega Golden Gun, 10 out of 10, love it. Bye bye.